then the one over there on.
Steve.
Where, what is that, road paint?
Charles?
You know, it looks like a big news bag.
Well, that's the
Steve, if you want,
disappointing
Mr. Chair.
child.
Oh, sure, how are you?
More space. Of course, we.
Chair.
Do much.
Next to Ryan.
Much as you wish.
I don't know how we're gonna
You can
get
pull up a
that.
chair next to Ryan.
But,
Or,
TLC.
it's kind of interesting.
all right, it's, well, okay.
Good.
All right, we'll go ahead and call the McHenry County TAC meeting for December 10th to order, starting with roll call. Steve Bicking,
Here?
Mike Von Bergen,
Present.
Thomas Rose. Here. Mike Warner,
Here.
Jody McCarthy, Pete Manhart, Brian Valesky,
Present.
Bruce Meyer,
Here.
Lori Ryan,
Here.
Alex Strack, Paul Siegfried, Vince Mosca,
Here.
Ryan Bieber,
Here.
Ernest Varga,
Here.
Darren Olson, Andrea, I think they told me they couldn't make it, Brad Andreessen did not make it, and then Cody Book.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. We'll go ahead and move to the minutes approval from our October 8th meeting. Do I hear a motion to approve?
I'll make it.
Okay. Made by Mike, do I have a second?
Second.
By Thomas?
I have a comment.
Okay, any discussion? Sure.
So I haven't seen this before, but normally, well, not normally, but in other meetings, I should say, is that if you have a member present, then the alternate wouldn't be shown as absent. But I don't know if that's always been the case, but normally, like, you know, the member and alternates are considered, you know, one vote or
Sure.
one representation. But it's not a big deal, but I haven't seen it like that before.
Okay, it's an IT thing.
Okay,
It's our system, I think, because we have the members and alternates,
Gotcha.
when we do one, it just automatically
Okay.
set up to do the other.
gotcha.
So, and Darren Olson is here. So if that's the case, as long as we have one or the other, we'll get some clarification for that, so.
Okay,
um,
just a question.
Okay,
Thanks.
any other discussion? All right, all in favor to approve?
Aye.
All right, guys have it. Do we have any public comments? Nope. Okay, any members' comments? Anyone have anything? No? Okay. We'll go ahead and move to old business. So we didn't have a meeting last month, so I'm trying to pick up on where we left off with our discussion for our BMP updates. So two things that, just to kind of refresh everyone's memory that we had was to make sure to make it usable and user-friendly to understand our approach. And then the second component to that was, you know, trying to establish some goals, reductions and things like that, which we know we're trying to get to that point. So we're kind of in the initial stages. So to help with that, we've added this secondary table with some design criteria that doesn't necessarily reflect like we're gonna get percentage reductions, but at least it should give us an ability that if this BMP is constructed per our guidelines in accordance with the SWCD guidance and Crystal Lake, that we have confidence in its performance. And we don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. That's something we're gonna look to do in the future, but to start off, that's those are the kind of the two arching points that seem to be thrown around. So with that,
Just to clarify, when you're saying SWCD, you mean the Illinois Urban Manual.
Illinois Urban Manual, yes, sorry. So with that, this is a work in progress. We've gone ahead and added Table 3, which is highlighting some of the pollutant sources, the pollutant itself, and then the treatment options. So we're hoping that this table is going to allow someone, whether they're an engineer or not, to figure out what their development is doing, which potential pollutant we would be concerned with, and you know, as part of this, the narrative that they have to put together, they may be addressing those pollutants in a different way. If they aren't, we're giving them some options here on a potential BMP. We previously had Mark with Geosyntec give us a presentation on the BMP database that's available, where they're analyzing a lot of these different BMPs and trying to figure out is it effective or not. So I just took those lists that had the highest efficiencies and we matched it with the pollutant. It's not saying this is a complete list, but just from that database, this is the information was input into here. And then we went ahead and said, okay, this is great, but potentially there's some other design components. So we didn't, you know, I didn't want to get too far ahead, so we just kind of, again, listed all the BMPs and just some components in here that maybe we want to think about providing, for example, for a detention basin. You know, there's 4 or 5 different items that would seem to make sense to make it function properly. So that's the point that we're at. Staff didn't want to, you know, continue further, so that's where I'd like to pick up the discussion and, you know, open the floor with anyone that has a comment, question, wherever we want to begin as part of that process. I also do want to point out that we still haven't discussed long-term maintenance of this, so that would kind of be the next step that we can look at, but we can get into that as well, where we have some longer-term solutions, or at least, again, a place to start with maintenance, implementation, and long-term tracking on our end.
Kind of the idea behind all this is that we have to address water quality in some way, but this avoids the pitfalls of having specific standards that have to then be measured, which then can add to complications as far as the cost of implementation and reporting. So if they are meeting the standards from a design perspective of the Illinois Urban Manual or any other standards that we put forth, that's going to be providing some level of water quality treatment without having to go to the level of measuring. You know, maybe at some point in the future, once the data has been collected more rigorously, we can move to a, you know, some type of numeric standard. But this is a big step forward that will provide some level of water quality benefits while minimizing the complexity.
And just to add on Scott's point real quick, we are coordinating with the Illinois State Water Survey that produced a document to MWRD about achieving such measures of how to set up the BMPs, how to test them, things like that, to try to collect some of this extra data. We haven't reviewed all of that, and we're also trying to coordinate with the Illinois State Water on other items, but that's the ultimate goal, where we're just trying to kind of get a ground floor established that we feel good about moving forward now to at least put something in place.
Do you think we could find that on MWRD's webpage?
I have an email from ISWS pointing me to it,
Okay.
so I can send that to
I'd be
everyone who's had a chance. Yeah, that's what they told me when I talked to them, is they looked at putting that together for these specific purposes. So they said it was an extensive document, just haven't had time to look at it, but that would be something we want to implement in the future, or those type of ideas.
And that would be a credible third-party
Sure.
document that then we could refer to if it applies to what we're trying to achieve here.
I did have
Yes.
I think the charting is a great way to go.
Okay.
Okay, now,
I apologize about the owl. Using using the revision tracker gives me, it's a really hard time, so I try to put it in a palatable way, so.
no,
Just
my,
FYI.
my only question was going to be, do we need some type of, I guess I'm spitballing here, do we need some type of caveat from maybe state's attorney that even though metals and oils may be being held, we're not making any statement as to the suitability of the soil in place? Because, I mean, you start talking hydrocarbons, or you start talking metals, and, I mean, that's a scary concept when it comes to the future of that piece of land. And I guess I don't want anyone to say, well, I put in a detention basin, they gave me a permit, so you can't say I have to do a phase 1 or phase 2 or phase 3 or clean up or anything, because I did what they said. I don't want us to get in a sticky wicket.
Fair point, I'm not sure. We obviously, this is kind of so the thought process here is to get a lot of those thoughts into this, revise it, and then have the state's attorney look at some of this language wording and just liability. I understand where you're coming from. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if anybody
That
else
certainly
has.
applies to all detention basin requirements for the past 20 years, so.
I agree, but I mean, when you start putting something formal and in writing, I don't want someone hanging their hat on this, saying, but I got a permit and you said it's okay. I mean,
So you're concerned about future transference of the property and saying that this is a high oil or something?
or someone saying, well, no, I don't have to do a phase 1 environmental because I did what they said. So,
Okay.
no, take the real estate transaction through, to hell with it, which is not the right way to go, but I could see some crafty attorney trying to pull it off just so they don't have to go through the cost or the cleanup. And I don't want to see them hide behind this, saying, well, we got a permit from county, what the hell?
Well, we can ask that question to see if it will give
That's
some
specific to
protection.
detention ponds, Ernest?
Yeah, because, I mean, it's obviously to any site when you go to do it.
I mean,
I've worked on phase 1, phase 2, and
Well,
phase
who
3.
knows what they buried under the site when they constructed it?
Exactly, but I'm just saying, if there's a runoff into a detention basin, that's my big thing.
Or a bioswale.
Or a bioswale,
or a rain
okay.
garden, or all of them.
Anything where it can permeate into the soil. I mean, it always scared, because whenever we did a phase 1, and then it went to phase 2 or phase 3, which is actual cleanup, you wouldn't believe how many people tried to hide behind other things. But I did, but I was told, but, and it's like, tough, you got
So
it
the
now.
closest thing I can think to that is the CCDD requirements about landfilling soil. So like, there's a regulation, like if we dredge a pond from a residential, there's a contingency that says, and I don't know who, I have to think about who signs it now. But-
An engineer, a
An
636.
engineer, right?
636.
So just find your engineer, but basically says, has this site ever been known to be used for anything other than agricultural residential purposes? And if you check that magic little checkbox, just one checkbox, and sign your name, everyone is
Forgiven.
safe.
I understand, I understand.
It's a thinly veiled line, but you know what I mean? There's state, I shouldn't say state, I assume it's based in state nomenclature, but there has been discussion of that concern. So that's the only other parallel that I can think of at this point. Now, it's not the same thing.
No, and then, but I'm looking at some of these uses, industrial processes. I've been to some places where they did plating. My God, I'm surprised they didn't have to core to the center of the earth and remove material because of the contamination. So it just, the listing scares me. I'm sorry, that's all. It's just-
But that's a different process. So
Yes.
what I'm saying, if it's residential, maybe that's one pathway.
Residential or ag is different, I
Right.
agree, but you get into some of these others, fueling stations, industrial process, that scares me. And that, too much experience, that's my problem.
So these aren't ranked, correct? So you just.
No,
you
no.
pick one
These
of them, it meets the standard.
These are not ranked. That would potentially be the idea unless we want, and this is where, this is probably gonna take a couple of meetings or separately with some of y'all that have more experience in some of this. If there's a particular BMP that maybe for suspended solids or oils, we know that maybe we wanna put it in a treatment train, that's where we would come down to the design requirements and indicate that, you know, under bioretention, if you're using it to meet this pollutant, you're also going to need, you know, or, you know, suspended solids, if you're doing an infiltration basin, you're also gonna need a sedimentation basin, because now you're gonna fill up your void space.
This is DuPage count, right? Means the same style?
I was just actually looking at theirs. I mean, they've got,
They're a little bit different.
Yeah, we did not, you know, cut and paste from that. This was
No,
a fresh
yeah,
thing.
yeah.
but even the PCBMP is their
like
nomenclature.
terminology is, yeah.
But that's
Both, yeah,
MS4.
MS4 too, so that's,
MS4,
yeah,
yeah.
we're trying to be consistent.
And that is actually part of the reason for this is consistent with the MS4 program. So instead of having these things completely separate, they're working together as a system, as opposed to, you know, maybe having things that are contradictory. So we're trying to make sure that there's continuity between the different permits and plans.
What DuPage also did was they have a list, but they put a nomenclature on there that says, if you have this pollutant, this BMP, you're gonna get 75% removal, or 25 or 50. I don't know how they came up with those numbers necessarily. We decided to not do that and go with this design criteria option that'll help kind of give us confidence again that there's a performance benefit to what we're seeing. And if there's a particular setup that should have multiple BMPs connected together, then, you know, that's what needs to happen. Also, it could just be a matter of, if you're doing a filter strip, if you have too much of a tributary area, well, you probably need to do the filter strip and something else then, because it doesn't meet those standards. So some of that is kind of inexplicitly written just through the Illinois Urban Manual requirements. And, you know, for what staff wants to do too, is we'd like to give kind of a cheat sheet, if you will, to help anyone that wants to implement this. So if you're looking to do a filter strip, we're gonna go ahead and get in there and just give you the, you know, tributary area and the size and all of that. And that's what staff is. That's gonna help us too when we're reviewing these. So if you're able to meet these conditions, you know, then that's satisfied, because the Illinois Urban Manual, like some of these might be like 8 pages of stuff that you're sifting through just to figure out how wide and what tributary area. So we do want to help from that perspective, to make it easier to have those available.
So I haven't seen this part of the permit process before, but like gas stations, they have to get an IEPA permit or something, and they also are required to put in some kind of catch basin in case there's a spill, correct?
And I think it goes through some kind of additional state agency that reviews tanks specifically, that they have to get approval for, some kind of emergency management, or I forget the name, related to hazards.
Okay.
So you're right, if someone's doing that and they're following that and then they provide that documentation, then no, we're not really looking at trying to enforce a BMP from that perspective, because you're handling it through. And I think Bruce gave this example of, like, let's say Bruce is trying to put up some tanks for some fertilizer or whatever. He has to go through the USDA to make sure that it's contained and all of that. So if USDA is driving a lot of those regardless, he just has to provide that information as part of his narrative to say, hey, there's no potential problems, or at least all the measures that can be taken to a reasonable step are there. We can certainly have catastrophe, but I don't, you can't really plan
And
for
what we're
that.
focused on is the stormwater. So design of the
Right.
double wall tanks, triple wall tanks, clay liner, that's all separate from what we're focused on. You know, it's important information, particularly from a groundwater perspective, but we're focused on it from a stormwater perspective.
But to Scott's example, if it's some kind of setup where the guy's pulling in and then he has to have a connection, and during that connection, if he's not paying attention and there's a potential spill or something like that, then maybe that's an area of concern where if there's constant spill and then you get rainwater and it washes off, then that's a different story. And if that's also, you know, if USDA requires preventive measures for that, then, you know, again, you can provide those to us and make sure that everything's taken care of. And I'm sure we know plenty of those examples of, you know, those type of connections or things, leaks.
And these are consistent, so I mean, an industrial facility is going to have to get an NPDES permit. And so these are consistent with what the requirements would be as part of an NPDES permit. So once again, this is intended to be supportive of other entities or other rules and make sure it's consistent. All of these types of things are things that are, I'd say, largely addressed from an industrial NPDES permit. So when you're talking about oil and grease, metals and things like that, these are the types of things that are discussed as part of an NPDES permit. Now, the BMP may be a little bit different, but with industries, the main focus is on preventing contact with rainwater with the potential pollutant. So if a facility has all of their chemicals inside and isn't storing anything outside, they can actually get like a general permit for their NPDES. If they are going to have stock equipment or materials stockpiled outside, then that adds to the complexity, and these types of things are addressed as part of that permit. But there is continuity between industrial practices and what we're talking about there. But I don't know that we would really deal with that very much.
No, it's just part of the process, right? So we're not trying to hinder anyone from moving forward, but it just gives us the surety that those requirements are being met or those guidelines are being followed.
For the most part, within the county, we wouldn't be regulating gas stations and some of these other things, maybe industrial facilities. But this provides guidance for the municipalities then to also help protect them.
Any other discussion? Everyone's so quiet today.
If anybody's
I think
interested,
I got to give you guys a meeting off to bring you back.
if anybody's interested, the EPA has what are referred to as industrial stormwater fact sheets. And so it's based on the SIC codes for industries, and it talks about basically what we have here, the potential source from that industrial use, the pollutants associated with that industry, and then the BMPs that can be applied. So if anybody has a nerdy interest in this type of stuff, it'd be well worth looking into. EPA industrial stormwater fact sheets.
Is outside salt storage allowed anymore?
Well, that's part of what we've talked about. We'd like to, it's something that really should be integrated into the stormwater management ordinances. Right now, our unified development ordinance is the only thing that has things preventing it, and it's like 20,000 cubic yards or something like that. It really should be part of the stormwater management ordinance.
I snuck it in here. It's not really a total suspended salt necessarily, but I did try to sneak that in here.
One question, and as I was looking at it, when you get into the post-construction best management practices and you note the exemption provided to ag, I'm just so I understand the wording.
Hold on.
It's
It's up here, or give me a number.
small 3. A1 small 3.
Okay. So this one.
Yeah. The question I had is this. It's exempt, understood, but does the ag entity doesn't have to come to the enforcement officer? You just blanketly grant it, right?
Well, as long as they're working with NRCS and providing the documentation that they're implementing those measures.
Okay, but I mean, just the way it reads, enforcement officer shall exempt. It almost sounds like I have to walk up to the counter and say, Stoyan, can I do this? And
Well,
the guy goes, yes. Or is it just blanketly?
Well,
It's exempt.
It's part of, well, first we'd have to figure out if there, whatever that property owner is proposing, does it trigger a permit or not? So if it triggers a permit, then we would be looking at enforcing this, and as part of their narrative, they might be saying, okay, I'm putting in a facility and a warehouse and X, Y, and Z, and as part of that, I'm following these NRCS guidelines. Then what we're saying is that would be the extent of the information they would need to provide to us.
So this is only if they're doing something new and in addition to what they have been doing.
Or it might
I
just be
mean-
an existing practice that they have been doing and they've been following, those guidelines through NRCS, USDA, whoever, that's been driving that.
But if they're following those guidelines and it's an ongoing practice, they don't need to do anything.
They wouldn't, I wouldn't expect them to provide an additional BMP on top of what they're already doing.
Okay, but they, I mean, if,
You gotta
I don't
give
know
me
how-
an example. I
okay,
don't know.
So you're saying they're not gonna have to come in every year and.
exactly,
and get
on an
authorization?
annual basis, come in and say, okay, here are my 35 fields, and here's what they don't have to do that.
Right.
Just the way it's worded when it says
Yes.
enforcement officer shall
Yes.
exempt.
You're right.
Right.
I was just like, you're gonna have a line out the door?
So it's exempting them from having to complete an additional post-construction best management practices, which is then exempting them from the maintenance because they don't have to complete it because they're already following guidelines. So yeah, it's a way to kind of, you guys keep doing what you're doing because you're following all your guidelines per USDA or whatever contract that they have ongoing as part of that.
Thank you. The way I read it, for some reason I warped myself and I was like, they have to go to you to get the exemption every year. And I was like, you can't keep up with the numbers, the paperwork. It won't work.
It's only part of if it triggers some kind of stormwater permit, they're looking to expand their operations, but their existing operations are already meeting these best management practices, right? So now they're saying, I'm gonna expand over here, so what we're gonna say is, okay, you're already doing what you need to do over here, so when you expand, maybe it's meeting overland flow route or detention
So
for
as an
release
example-
rate, but the BMP component maybe doesn't apply because they're already following these other practices and they're planning on implementing on their expansion.
So they're going, a farmer decides he's gonna put up some grain elevators. And he's gonna create a site with grain elevators and whatever, and they'll have hardened surface. This is what they would have to come into you for. Not their existing ag operation that they've been doing
No.
for a century.
No, yeah, I don't think we're looking to get retroactive on anyone, even if it's a commercial facility.
Okay, just checking, because
Unless you guys want to.
No,
Okay, all right, I'm
no,
just-
the logistics
I'm
were
just making
I'm just looking at logistics, I'm like, oh my
I
God.
understand, no.
I'm not coming to that meeting.
Okay. No. So yes, this is meant for new permits. We wouldn't necessarily be looking to take out on existing facilities unless somehow the new permit is, everything's changing, you need, it just.
So a
depends
farmer
on the
decides he's
extent.
gonna create an ethanol plant, of course, it's his whole operation. I got it, okay. Thank you for the clarification.
I got two comments,
Yes.
on oils, you have a term that says service areas.
Yeah, for like maintenance of vehicle. So
Yeah, so
that's the
is
thing I
that
want to
vehicle
focus on.
service- Vehicle service areas?
We can come up with definitions for these. For example, like the other thing that I have is parking lots and driveways. I think what makes most sense is probably to come up with like vehicle traffic as opposed to, or do we want to come up with an impervious surface here? These are kind of the nitty-gritty details that I'd love to try to work out and give more detail instead of just saying service areas. Well, okay, what does that mean? Do we want to add a definition or do we want to put some more into this table?
I would just suggest one more word in there, just say vehicle service areas, in that.
Okay.
The other one the other
Or
comment.
equipment, vehicle/equipment,
Sure.
Maintenance, maybe,
maintenance service, okay.
or maintenance instead of service. I don't-
We can do that.
Under nutrients, you include like exposed soil areas, which is good, but I would add, I don't know if you use it this at all, but like permanent turf reinforcement mats. We use those a lot, like on slopes, to beef them up for like river restoration or, things like that, where you have concentrated flow. So I don't know if
Overflow of
it's,
the
Like
detention basin.
armoring? Like,
Yeah.
is that the idea? To like-
yeah, that's right. I don't know if it's considered a BMP though, but
Well, we can, like I said, we can, the list for the BMPs and the sources, I just kind of generically pull a lot of that information from sources we already have. So we can change wording, revamp wording, we can add additional items that might be missing. And then on the BMP side, again, I just listed it, but, for like high rate biomedia filtration, do we really want to put that in, or like, what does that mean? I haven't, like you said, staff hasn't spent the time to break a lot of this down. I wanted to first come in, didn't want you guys to hate this idea, have to scrap it, go in a different direction before we got too far ahead of ourselves. And so this is kind of the first step to that, taking some feedback and anything that you might see right now, and we can, staff can dive into a lot of these, put it more formal, fill out kind of the chart of some of the design requirements, and then we can go through it.
I would say permanent soil stabilization practices. Whether, and maybe check if that's actually considered a BMP. I'm not sure.
Okay, as a BMP potentially?
Right.
Okay.
What are we talking about?
I think he's just in general for like exposed soil.
Yeah, to cover the.
Can you say that again? Can you say your phrase?
Permanent soil stabilization practices. Covers more of a range.
And this is not intended to be, this is only things on this list. If people have novel ideas, they're welcome to put those forward. This is not intended to be restrictive if people have better options that aren't on the list.
I mean, that's, the river restoration work that we do, if you get an IEPA grant, it points directly to erosion of the banks as, a nutrient that you're solving, basically, and they count that towards the nutrient reduction equation.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah,
And that was the idea behind putting exposed soils, was to kind of try to cover
yeah, okay.
a lot of those elements, whether it's erosion or just tree clearing or, whatever it might be.
Yeah, a slight side note, and it's because I had to stop at a couple of intersections, waiting in traffic. There's now a movement afoot within this county where there are certain companies, I'm not gonna name names because that's not my goal, where they'll come in and basically clear cut a piece of property.
Right.
I mean, a forested area, wooded, scrap vegetation, whatever, and I mean, they denude it. And obviously, forested areas do not have the same vegetative ground cover that open areas do. I mean, it's obvious. And I was sitting at a couple of intersections and I was looking at lots of bare soils. I'm like, okay, they cleared the land. Obviously, they have an intended use. I don't know what it is. But there's nothing that has to be done. I mean, they just leave it. They don't actually come in for a permit to clear the land.
We have required, we've issued violations for land clearing on those type of scales.
Okay,
It's-
thank you for the education. I was just like,
It's
I
a
wonder-
case-by-case basis, depending on what they're doing. Sometimes they're going in and trying to remove individual invasive species, buckthorn, et cetera. Sometimes it's just, they're just.
Yeah, I'm talking about looks like napalm
Yeah.
went through when you're done with it.
Yeah,
It's like, oh,
those-
okay, it's gone.
Yeah, those we are requiring a permit to then just have them restabilize those areas.
Thank you.
Because we don't know how long it's gonna take before, they might say, well, we're looking to build whatever, but we don't know the time frame, so we don't want that exposed.
Thank
So
you,
we
thank you. I
have
just
been-
appreciate
We
it.
have been trying to enforce those.
Is that zoning specific?
What's that?
Is that zoning specific to who would be required to permit that?
Stormwater
No, I mean, as far as
Would be
A1,
any-
A2,
for clearing?
yeah?
Well, if you're doing it as part of ag practices and tilling, it's exempt, so we don't, but it's normally stormwater division that's going after folks for clearing for, it's mostly related to either like residential lots and subdivisions that we're seeing it, where they're coming in and clearing whole lots and regrading and changing and all of that. On the ag fields, if it's related to a farming practice or tillage or bringing in some soil to work in, we have not been, it's already exempt in the ordinance, those type of practices, so.
So the one gray area that I've seen abused is when the solar comes in. And when they come in, they prep it, and then they don't show up for another 6 to 12 months before they put a pole in the ground. And they've cleared all the trees, and it's a HEL piece of ground, highly erodible. Like, we would never be allowed to do that on HEL, but it's still ag. You guys might want to
They
address
shouldn't be
that.
moving forward with any improvements until they have a permit for us if it's a solar. We haven't been issuing any permits prior to them, whether it's clearing or.
So even if they have a permit though, they didn't do anything to stabilize, and nobody came out and made them stabilize
They should.
on a highly erodible piece of ground.
When it's completed or during?
For the 12 months it sat and turned into ragweeds.
Well, you know, if they go in and they clear and then they don't start their, you know, operation, I can't necessarily tell them, hey, you're going too slow.
It's an NPDES.
I don't
Yeah.
think you could.
If they take too long, according to their NPDES permits, they have 14 days if they're not gonna do anything with it.
Right.
I do the NPDES inspections, and like, if it's a developer and they're like, well, we got somebody coming in here in 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks, it's like, okay, I'll let it go. But if it turns into something like 4
Yeah.
months, then I'm like, you gotta do something about it. But the issues you're talking about could be things that, sites that I haven't seen, but if I go to a site and I see that, I include it in my report notes that I sent to Illinois EPA. If it's got a McHenry County stormwater, I'll put it to McHenry County, but it's kind of hard to enforce with some of with just the way the stormwater management ordinance is written. If they're not following soil erosion sediment control practices, we can tell them that they have to do it, and if it's really bad, you can issue stop work orders. But Illinois EPA is the only people that have teeth to really punish people for it, and they take a lot of convincing to do that.
I can't think of any sites that have done that in
Between
our
Harvard
area.
and Alden on 173. Between Harvard and Alden on 173, right past Red's Pizza, east of Red's Pizza where it used to be. I mean, no offense or buts, that was a travesty what they did there for a year.
I'm not picturing that one. Is that one that,
You know where 173 turns north-south for just a little bit?
Is that incorporated?
It's unincorporated.
Unincorporated.
in the south side from that one?
But,
Because all the ones that have gone in in the county have requirements for native vegetation, at least the first 30. You know, I have had to chase after them, but that's, in all honesty, I guess that's more after the panels have been put in.
It's the process during that was the problem on that one.
What was it?
The process during that was
Yeah,
the
because
problem. on that
I mean,
one.
they're shooting themselves in the foot if they're letting weeds grow during that
They're
time
shooting
period.
me in the foot, because I got all their noxious
I don't-
weeds
I
that
don't
filled the ditch
dispute you there,
with
Cody.
dirt and topsoil, I mean. Yeah.
I'd say, you know, if you do see that, you know, that's something I think we can go after, you know, based on a complaint.
Can you,
I can't picture that site.
have like a name? Does the county have oversight over that state
the one
permit?
Next step, I think.
What they're enforcing on the counties?
I'm not,
Would the county be able to?
The solars have some
This is already coming.
auspice they've been granted by the state, like,
Yeah.
you can't say anything to them about anything else.
They're by two stages. One, the ones that were approved prior to the state legislation are under our purview.
not
We certainly
ringing
could
a bell.
do enforcement there. The ones post, I guess I'm not sure on that, but I think based on complaint, we would be able to.
Yeah, I mean, look, if there's an issue, we go out, we issue a violation, it doesn't mean that people comply with us.
Yeah.
I just,
But it has to be a reported violation. You don't go looking actively for these.
I don't have the manpower
I
to.
do.
But yeah, no,
But
that's why I
I'm
chuckle,
also
'cause
the only one.
we don't have, yeah, so we do rely on people calling in, for example, if there's an issue, we'll go out, take the photos, open the violation and start the process. And so, I mean, I've got one, in the subdivision, they're dredging. I've had 2 weeks now, been asking them to do silt fence violations open. you know, even a stop work order, I can issue that, but it doesn't guarantee someone is, to your point, that's what I mean. I don't know, I don't have a way to speed up their clock.
Well, there are
I
plenty
can-
of circumstances where calls have come in and we've sent inspectors out to look at them, and then we get a call the next day and find a solution. So, you know, there are opportunities to intervene and correct things. You know, I guess if they're not going to comply, that's a different story.
For the most part, most people are responsive. There is always going to be some that aren't or don't care, etc. And I don't know if that's, you know, potentially what we're looking at in your case.
Well, and what you're talking about there, Cody, certainly goes against the intent of everything we're talking about here. It goes against the standards that we've done as part of our review process. So if you see that, don't hesitate to give us a call and we'll do what we can.
And I know the neighbors were calling on it, and I don't know if anything was done or not, obviously not on that end. What ended up happening was the health department got involved because of noxious weeds. And that was apparently what motivated them to go mow it at least.
Yeah,
So,
and that is where,
I mean, that was their ground cover, was ragweed, it was really cool.
and that's where we do turn to where that is covered, yeah. The health department does cover the noxious weed element. So there is a little bit of coordination from that perspective.
They at least seemed like they maybe had teeth or something. Something happened when they got called,
So
so.
I certainly would have liked to have known about that and had the opportunity to weigh in, because that diminishes their ability to meet the performance standards that we have gone through a review process to approve. And so that, in my perspective, that is a violation. And so, please, if you do see something like that, don't hesitate to reach out.
Have you guys gone after the fact and done, so you do a study on what you think it's going to put off as far as watershed when you put these panels in? And that's a highly erodible piece of ground as it is. Have you gone back after the fact and actually seen during a 1-inch event how much they're actually displacing? You know, they say it runs off and hits the ground and goes in, and that's just not accurate, no matter what you have for vegetation under it. This is in Boone County, but we run farm, or don't anymore, that went into solar panels, and it's not even highly erodible, and the water that comes off that elevation, I mean, you get a 4-inch event in Old Iron, you come over 171 or 20 in Garden Prairie. I mean, I just curious if what you're projecting actually comes true.
I'm a nerd, so when I'm out and doing my inspections, that's one of the number one things I'm looking for. And it really does depend on the quality of the vegetation establishment. We're talking earlier, if it's a combination of grasses and forbs, that does a very good job of stabilizing. If it's during the establishment period, when you don't have that root structure in place, then that's the vulnerable period. But once that stuff is established, if it's properly established and you have proper cover, that's going to absorb all but the heaviest of storms. And I have not seen any evidence of erosion at the sites that I've inspected. I have seen areas where maybe the vegetation hasn't been managed to my liking, but I have not observed erosion, and that is something I'm looking for when I'm doing my inspections.
That's in Garden Prairie if you want to go outside the lines.
One thing I will add is that's why we, even though the state has come out, just to wrap up this side note, or in a sentence on,
What do you know, I really would like to, I wish they had a video of the one I wasn't at. Who the hell was the scapegoat? I wasn't here, what?
one of the things that the state has come out has limited some of our ability to enforce our performance standards for natives. One of the things that we do in our review is we push for it. If they don't want to establish the natives and they want to go with just regular grass or something like that, then we do indicate to them that you may need to put something to help control that concentrated flow. And I've had phone calls related to folks that, yeah, if you know there's an area that potentially you have a concern for that, then by all means, you can still, even though it's not technically triggering detention, you can still require them to find a way to help with that concentrated runoff that might be hitting, certain infrastructure coming off a steep slope or whatever it is. So it's still in there, and anyone can, any municipality, whether it's McHenry County or incorporated, does have an ability to take a look at that. So.
I could easily see these high-intensity, short-duration storms we've been getting. I could easily see runoff coming off those fields. Because you're asking the vegetation to do a lot. And
Absolutely.
it's an unnatural runoff event, right?
Especially on a steep, so if you have a steep
Steep-
slope.
I mean,
yeah.
So I mean, to his point, I mean, I think that's
And that
something we
cuts
should all
around
watch
one of
because
those
we may have
concrete
to
pipes.
adapt to it.
It's,
Yeah.
it's fair, and we, like the one here on Charles, it's very steep. Then there's a
Right.
big buffer area. We haven't seen any issues with
That's
that
good.
to,
But I
to
mean-
now. But that doesn't mean that it can't
Storms are
occur.
nasty.
We're mindful of that, like I said, that's why I brought that up. We're mindful of that because one of the things is that it's not triggering detention, but that doesn't mean that you're not still dealing with overland flow rates that are increased, higher concentrations, et cetera, so.
It still is triggering a permit, right? It's just not
Right.
detention. It's either whether
Correct.
it's before or after the state law, you guys are required to
Correct.
issue a permit.
Correct, yes.
Well, and so one of the other things we have in our, and this applies to the one where we actually, the ones that, the first 30 that we have actual control over, is that there are adaptive management practices that have to be addressed as part of that permit, and erosion would be part of that. And I'm, by no means dispute that there would be runoff potentially coming off. It's not going to absorb 100% every drop of 6-inch rainfall that's coming down in a half hour. But it should be holding the vegetation or the soil pretty well. But that is one of the things that is addressed as part of the adaptive management practices, is you do have to be monitoring for that. And that, like I said, that's something I'm going to be looking for when I'm doing my inspections. It's a good point.
I had a question on this.
Yes, thank you, Darren, for bringing us back. Thank you, yes,
Yeah.
appreciate it.
The red text.
Yeah.
You used the words detention basin and retention basin, and I was looking at the DuPage counties, and they use wet bottom basin, dry bottom basin. In yours, what do you mean by detention versus retention basin?
It was just a terminology that I was pulling from the international manual. We can just go with, combine those two into one basin or whatever whatever wording we want to do. I feel like, yeah, because you can go dry bottom or wet bottom, I didn't necessarily
Retention
want
is
to.
old fashioned.
That's what I was
think
thinking.
I think it's outdated.
Okay.
I think it's what became wet bottom.
Okay,
I think.
Right.
so that's what they refer,
Because it
okay.
retained water is always how I interpreted it.
Should we just
Whereas
keep?
detention is a temporary.
Well, detention, I mean, that's like the rate and, all that stuff, but I think that the traditional retention basin is our modern wet basin.
Wet bottom. So do you want to have both, or do you just want to do detention basin and that's going to?
I would recommend either having dry bottom detention basin and
And wet bottom, okay.
detention basin, and not have retention basin.
I've already crossed it off, yep.
We don't like old person stuff.
Excuse me? Punk.
I think also,
Yeah.
like, just make the design criteria,
Mhm.
we could just follow the ordinance. I think some of this may not, just correlate it with our current ordinance
Okay.
on the language and the criteria.
Yeah.
I don't think we have a 1.5% slope across the bottom required. I'm not sure.
Remove that, or?
Well, I mean, just match it up. I mean, I think there's other requirements, depending on what criteria you want to put here.
Yeah.
There's criteria listed elsewhere.
It doesn't get into some of these specific construction elements, but I'll make sure that we don't duplicate, that this is meant to be kind of an additional to some of the guidance, to some of the other things. So we don't, like the minimum 1.5 slope, the reason that came up is there is no design guideline in the SMO for detention basins, and when they become flat, that's where we have the issue. So that was the thought process behind it. But again, all of this is a moving target, so if the committee feels that we should not have minimum bottom slope, then we can remove that. If maybe 2% is preferred, so that it's not a sloppy, we've all seen those, right? How they turn out and they're just mud, and then they discharge into, somewhere else.
Are we gonna have like the basins that are in the ordinance in the SMO and that wouldn't necessarily match this?
No, they still will match so in the SMO, it just talks about release rate and storage and those type. It doesn't talk about like, having clay compaction due to leaching or a layer, or establishing minimum slopes. So I'm just trying to take some of those items that aren't there and put them into here. But because stormwater detention is referenced in another part of the SMO, then, you know, we can move that. It just made sense to kind of put it all in one area here. And maybe in the other part of the SMO, we just have to reference.
Yeah, I guess
To
one way or
double check
the
that,
other, you
yeah.
can cross-reference these
Right.
together.
I definitely agree with you.
How does that match up with what's in the technical reference manual?
That thing is so old, it's updated. I honestly, there was like an effort 5 years ago to start redoing it. It's just, there's so much in there that's outdated that, you know, get this in place and it'll come. I will say that. And to your point, that's why I like developing, for anyone that's saying, okay, I'm gonna do a detention basin with some of these criteria, plus what's within the urban manual. We wanna make it easy to just give really quick for engineers, here are the design parameters we're gonna look for. And we can just check it off from a review perspective. Technically, those type of things go into the technical reference manual, but we just don't have the capacity to update that right now. So we're gonna kind of release this with it and provide it on the website. And any of our reviewers, if they come across something, hey, they're doing this BMP, we're gonna include that and say, just meet these elements to make it easier.
Anthony, how can you want new terms on one side, but then you want to have old terms on the other?
Little mix and match.
I see.
Best of both worlds.
Right.
And, you know, the focus is going to be, you know, reliance on the Illinois Urban Manual in lieu of an updated technical reference manual.
Yeah, so I'm also, if there's already, and I had a highlight, I don't remember which ones, but if there's a carryover from the Illinois Urban Manual for detention basins, any of this criteria is not meant to bring that in. So anything that already exists, whether it's in the SMO or the Illinois Urban Manual, this is in addition to that.
Okay.
To give us more confidence that these things are gonna perform the way that we want them to perform. At least based on just our kind of collective knowledge, right? We don't necessarily have the data right now to indicate whether or not if someone takes these measures, we're gonna be achieving a certain % reduction. So that's kind of the second step to this is we have these measures, now we test them to see how they're operating, find their shortcomings or where they're overcoming other things and come back and revise them once more to potentially hit certain goals. I won't be able to pass certain goals in front of the committee without having some kind of data to indicate our waters are being polluted with something, you know, a specific pollutant that's causing issues. To then indicate, okay, we've got a high concentration of X in this watershed. We're gonna achieve bringing it down to this level with these measures, right? Ultimately, that's what we wanna be able to get to. And with our watershed planning, which we're moving forward with and coordinating again with the Illinois State Water Survey, they actually can help us with a lot of that too, in terms of the modeling and answering and some of the ag community. You guys want to know how much impervious area is potentially too much in an ag field. They can run some of those studies for us, right? And for each watershed, then we can have different allowances. So a farmer on a 30-acre pieces of ag land may be able to do things a little bit differently than some of our urbanized areas. So we're trying to work towards those things, but again, this is just a starting point to try to help put something in place to give some protections, so that IEPA eventually doesn't come down and give us mandatory targets.
Do you want comments on some of these design criteria?
Yeah, if, you know, you guys don't have to do it now. If you guys want to take a moment to look at some of this and you know, shoot me an email. I absolutely do, Mike. Anything in terms of the wording, in terms of a particular B and P, like, hey, I know, you know, I know it ends up on the list, but I just don't see how this is going to be implemented properly. You know, I get that. Again, I just tried to get all the information on here to give you guys, here's what everything looks like, and then, you know, now we can start to form it and mold it into something that makes more sense.
We want to give you guys something to react to, but in our internal discussions, we always talk about, you know, the depth of knowledge that you guys bring to the table from actual experience. So we are looking to you guys to provide comments.
What's the idea behind the clay cap?
Yeah,
It's like a mixed message of,
Right.
you gotta try to
Leaching.
infiltrate, please infiltrate if you can, and then please don't infiltrate.
It depends if they're trying to do infiltration or not, but just avoid leaching was kind of the idea, so.
I guess, but why? I mean, just.
Well, I think I might be the cause of that comment. I didn't put that in there, but the USGS, and this is kind of to Ernest's point, there are concerns about leaching from detention basins because you're concentrating runoff into these basins, a certain amount of the sediment settling down and providing opportunity for metals and other things then to leach down into the groundwater. And so there is
Don't you
talk
get that-
about.
Wouldn't you get that with a infiltration basin?
Well, but then
Where you're
we would
you're
require
encouraged.
that sediment forebay potentially to help capture a lot of that, and maybe that's where you have that cap and everything to prevent that, and hopefully the water that goes in is cleaner. That's kind of again, a lot of this is really
You're
rough.
settling out your contaminants either way.
Well,
Right.
So one of the ideas is a forebay. So you're using your forebay as a sediment trap where the worst, the nastiest will be captured. Design your forebay so that it's easily accessible by a backhoe.
Okay.
And then you're preventing that from getting into your detention basin and then reducing the potential for
Doesn't the standard,
infiltration.
what detention basin have a clay liner though?
What's that?
Well, if you want to hold the water,
Right.
probably a good idea.
Yeah.
So it,
Depends on the soils.
yeah.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the idea behind it, is if you're not doing infiltration, you're just doing a detention basin, and there's the ability for these things to collect, and we don't necessarily want them infiltrating and migrating. If there's areas where we want to promote infiltration, then we want to have, you know, some kind of treatment train that they're settling out somewhere else, collecting somewhere else, would be the preferred method, if you will.
One thought I had was, rather than including table 4, can we just reference, or could you reference, whether it's the Illinois Urban Manual or standard practices? I feel like if we get into listing design criteria for dry bottom, wet bottom, and all these different features, I mean, that list could go on for pages and pages.
So the idea behind table 4 is incorporating any additional elements outside of some of the standard practices. So definitely, I'd have to, again, this was just to drive an example. So if the Illinois Urban Manual already requires a minimum bottom slope or having compacted clay, then yeah, I would remove those out of this particular criteria. So it's just meant to demonstrate the thought process behind including other elements that we want to incorporate to give us confidence that if they're just doing one of these items, we know that it's going to be providing performance benefits.
Do you require a forebay for detention basins?
It's automatically required under the Crystal Lake watershed, whatever, I always forget the name of that thing.
Watershed Design Manual.
Thank you. That Crystal Lake Watershed Design Manual does have really good detailed steps for infiltration. So that was one I tried to avoid here in Table 4 because we would direct people to that document. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
For the whole county or just for the Crystal Lake?
For the whole county, yeah. So the whole county
Okay.
would have to meet that. Currently, it's just for the Crystal Lake watershed.
Including like within city limits? It's like City of Woodstock, would they be required to meet that?
For infiltration purposes? for a BMP, yeah, this would require municipalities.
No, not the municipality itself, something that would fall in their jurisdiction is what I'm saying. So like out there on Lucas Road.
Yeah, so anything incorporated, this would apply. The SMO does apply to
That's-
incorporated areas. They have to adopt it. So what we try to,
They're putting an infiltration pond coming off of that road they just cut behind the hospital in a peat bog right next to the Kish headwaters with no clay liner whatsoever, and it's gonna come off that road and it's gonna go right in. No clay liner. How is that?
I'm not familiar with the.
I mean, their retention system out there is,
Well, we don't,
but that doesn't fall under this or no?
this would fall under this, these changes are not yet in the SMO.
Okay.
So right now, the SMO, some of the language for water quality is very generic. We're trying to move away from this idea of having these kind of hard targets of, you're triggering an impervious amount, therefore you need to do a BMP. We'd rather work towards, okay, what is the development actually doing? Is a BMP required or not? Hence the narrative. Then you get into, okay, we want to do infiltration. All right, that's where then we are requiring people to use the Crystal Lake ordinance that talks about infiltration, how many boring holes you need to do per the area, the size of the area, the forebay, all of that stuff. It currently in the SMO for water quality and infiltration, it's just basically a suggested follow the 7-step method to achieve that. Another component is we want to promote infiltration for our aquifers, but we can't enforce municipalities to also require infiltration because that challenges their use, something we can't get into. So we try to do as much with stormwater as we can without impacting their ability on dictating use of the properties. I don't know if that helps answer.
Is your concern that it's infiltrating too fast? So that's another issue altogether.
Okay.
Because then in that case,
Because now we're
you're
gonna
not
assault the
getting,
road.
you're not getting any cleansing effect from the
Right.
media.
I mean, they ran a road right through a peat bog.
Unfortunately, nothing's gonna take the chlorides out. That's actually why we have our sensible salting training and trying to use liquids and other things to reduce the amount of chlorides. Because we don't have a filtration system that'll take the chlorides out. So that is a huge problem and something that's not taken into consideration usually when new roads are being put in. So that's a real issue, but no design criteria would remove the chlorides, unfortunately.
Can I ask a question? This is in regards to what Mike said. Mike, were you
Of course.
talking about forebays in regards to, because you can use a forebay for whether you're doing infiltration or not, and then there's just a forebay for capturing sediment in a detention basin, irregardless of infiltration design or not infiltration. Because I don't see forebays used. I shouldn't say that. There are some exceptions. They're highly regarded everywhere you go, but very rarely are they implemented.
So to your point, whether or not they're using infiltration, that could be something that, again, we would ask to be as part of the design for a detention basin potentially. Do we want to take that measure? Those are the type of things we want to look at so that when we put these guidelines in, we feel comfortable that when we start moving forward and, implement testing and figure out how these are performing and where we're at, that we haven't necessarily generated an issue for ourselves that, we didn't intend for. So if there's an idea that works well, but potentially it might produce too much, phosphorus or nitrogen or something, is there a way that we can incorporate that design that might give us some confidence that we're not creating a future issue? I mean, we can't, obviously we won't know that until we start testing this stuff to see how it's performing, but at least to give us some confidence or at least have a plan And so that if we do see it, we can then come back to some of this and point out, well, okay, this was actually much bigger of an issue than we anticipated, which there's no way we can know some of that unless we put it into place. But that's the point of this, is to kind of take everyone's, experience and develop something that we feel good about.
I'm surprised that, I still don't like the clay cap or liner, but I'm surprised that that isn't covered in this excellent document from 2007 by Hay and Associates. That the Crystal
So
Lake.
isn't that excellent though, if it's not being covered, isn't that excellent?
The Crystal Lake Watershed Stormwater Management Design Manual.
It's an emerging technology.
Well, and just to
Fair.
to clarify, is that in there because my discussion about the USGS studies?
No, not necessarily. I just, from just design, usually you design your berms and stuff like that to be compacted clay so you don't have water leaching out and things like that, just in general. From the stormwater.
Compounding berm.
From the compounding of the berm and in general, I just threw the leaching in there, a little bit of that, but it's not solely from you. It's just, we don't have some of this, so if someone's building 5-foot berms, they probably want to make sure that water isn't slowly gonna start impacting those berms, right? So it goes beyond just some of that, but yeah, we can remove that. Again, these are just ideas to get the juices flowing before we got too far along. And some of these I just generally put some questions, do we want bioretention? Do we want to have a vegetation list? Do we want to have certain soils, compost, whatever, in there so that it's not sending off too much nitrogen or phosphorus to neighboring properties? So most of these detention basins are adjacent to ag communities, so I'm sure they'd probably appreciate not getting, an influx of these type of things.
Yeah, so this was a topic of conversation. So, historically, compost, like a sand compost mix, was the design of choice. But what's that?
A third, and a third.
And, but is that, we're kind of looking to you guys, is that, it's our understanding that might be changing and that they're not adding compost anymore?
Wisconsin discourages it.
Yeah.
Because it's actually a source of nutrients.
So that's specifically in there to stimulate conversation and get guidance from you guys.
Does Wisconsin go to more wood chip bioreactors now?
Sand
Just pure sand?
for urban stuff. Maybe for bioreactors are more ag. Yeah, and the wood chips.
Because you're looking for the biological activity around the wood chips there as opposed to filtration, so.
Yeah, so this design manual says a liner may be needed. But you're saying it's required. I would just say the liner would be around the forebay and not the whole pond.
No, that's fine. So that type of input is what I would be looking for from you guys. And it's 10:30 if we wanted. It sounds like everybody kind of likes this or is in agreement of it. Now we just gotta actually figure out, get our ducks in a row, our I's dotted, our T's crossed on refining and getting input. So if anybody has anything based on this list, email me, we'll get it in there, we'll bring it back, and I'll show you what everybody gave to me, and you guys can go at each other and figure out which ideas you guys like or don't like, or could be issues, etc.
Was the goal to have the entire county's ordinance mimic what's in Crystal Lake now?
No,
Is
not
that the
necessarily.
goal, or-
That's what it's saying in number 1.
We just,
Maybe it's a starting point.
CC1.
yeah, it's a document that exists. We don't want to recreate a good document related to infiltration. That's the idea.
Part of the appeal with that one is it is a local, document. And so people locally are already implementing it as opposed to taking something from Portland, Oregon. That seemed to be relevant here, and maybe it doesn't apply as a across the board requirement, but if infiltration is what is going to be part of that design criteria, then that would trigger that requirement. But once again, I'm looking to you guys for guidance.
Well, it says and or, I mean, what does that mean?
That
It's either both or it's
Yeah,
not
it could-
both.
well, it depends which one's applicable.
Because of it,
So we can remove the and or.
maybe or, I don't know.
We just
I
don't-
don't know what the end goal was, but
Well, the end goal is to say that Crystal Lake Watershed Design Manual has really good infiltration on, really good information on infiltration. The Illinois Urban Manual has really good information on these other BMPs. And so what we're telling folks is you're gonna have to go to those sources, follow those minimum requirements. It could be a combination of following both because you're choosing items from both. And also any additional criteria that we want to implement as part of that. So it's trying to not regurgitate what the Illinois Urban Manual has and Crystal Lake has and put it in here. It's just referencing those documents as, depending on what you're doing, go to those documents and follow those steps. Otherwise, if we don't mention them, we're gonna take that information directly and put it into here. And I don't know that we need to do that. So that's the idea. So I don't know how the wording needs to work out better to note that, but that's the goal. And again, there's probably other components that, you know, we haven't discussed some of the infiltration that we'd like to do for like 1 acre developments, get that information in there. Triggers, right. So there's a lot of cleanup. We tried to kind of take it step by step, do this portion first and then round it out with, you know, maintenance and some of those other things and word order. And again, we can tackle that together as we see it and make little notes and things like that. But that's the intent. All right, so if there's nothing else, again, if you guys email me, that would be great. Staff will start to, you know, do some of this as well. And then we can finalize some of this and shoot it off to the state's attorney, hopefully in the next couple of months.
Is there a timeline that you want us to follow with our commenting?
Well, I mean, we're gonna meet in January, and I actually wanna, before I get ahead of myself, one of the next thing is setting our schedule for next year. So if you get, you know, why don't we move to setting the schedule, and then we can discuss when you guys want to provide comments. I'd love to keep it moving, obviously, so.
Why not just next month?
That's fine. I guess I'm leaving it to the committee to decide what you guys prefer. We can do next month, or we can do it 2 months.
What would be the deadline? So the next meeting would be the 14th. What's the deadline to get, you know, information into the packet based on that?
I posted the Friday before, so it's the 14th, that's what, Tuesday, so probably by the 10th or the 9th, whatever that Friday is. But ideally, I get it over to my admin staff by like that Wednesday.
So the 8th.
And it would be good to
But-
kind of keep this part going because we do have other topics that we're going to be covering.
And obviously, if someone, you know, doesn't have the time, just because you didn't get it into me by the 8th doesn't mean you can't bring it up at the meeting or at a later time. It would just be great if, you know, whoever can, let's get it in here, I'll throw it up there, and then we can continue moving forward. And if someone, you know, I get it, life happens. You don't have you guys are volunteers on this. That's why, Mike, I don't want to put deadlines. I'd rather have you guys, you know, feel comfortable with it and getting your help. So I'm not going to put a deadline on it. And so if that works, we can, you know, move forward and get me your comments if you can by next meeting. If not, then, you know, let me know. Or if it's just thoughts, you know, if there's things that staff can research, some ideas, send it to me. We'll see what we can do and bring it back and share with the group. Okay?
I just have a side comment.
Yes, please.
From Dave Powers talked to me this morning. Did these meetings formally happen on Thursday rather than Tuesday, or has it always been on Tuesday?
It's always been Tuesday, so if you guys want, well, let's close out this discussion and then we'll move into item 6.1 to discuss the schedule. Okay, so the schedule, this is what we did for the year. So I just regurgitated it for everyone. If you want to move to Thursdays, one, I'd have to check to see what availability looks like for Thursdays for these rooms. And then also the fourth Thursdays typically are MCSC, so I would just, we'd probably want to do it on the third or second Thursday or something. So again, the schedule's open for discussion, so.
It's not, I don't believe it's every single month, but I'd have to go back and check in with him in our calendar, but I think our leadership team meets, on Tuesdays as well, at this exact same time frame.
Okay.
So we have at least a few of those that might be a conflict, but I mean, if it's good on Tuesdays for the rest of the group, it is what it is. Work around it. Just wanted to bring that,
like I said,
to bring that up.
I'm open to discussion, I don't know. Anyone else have any thoughts if we moved it to Thursday as opposed to Tuesday?
And I can always go back and in a couple days we can send you, like how many out of 12 really is it? Is it 3, is it?
A horse apiece.
Kind of different.
As long as it's not the same Thursday as the Lake
Right.
County Tech.
Okay.
Because they have theirs, they canceled this month. They have theirs on the third Thursday.
Third Thursday?
Yeah. So any other,
Well, that would be our SMC.
Fourth.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Well, let's do the following then. Why don't we keep what we have pending MCCD and seeing how much of a conflict it is. That would also give me an ability, if there is, to talk to admin to see what the room availability looks like on different days. And why don't we do this schedule? We'll do January 14th for January, which is the same second Tuesday, 9:30. Does 9:30 still work for everyone? Do we, 9:30?
Yeah.
All right. So we'll keep 9:30, and then we can use that meeting. I can bring up, if it doesn't work for MCCD, we can revise the schedule, and I'll give you guys an idea of what are the best dates and times.
I think, Darren, are you on the Lake County SMC? Yes, so
Yeah.
us three are all on that. So that's the third Thursday.
Third Thursday.
The only difficulty you may end up having, it happens that the Tuesday, February 11 one, it's the same day that Lake County is doing their DECI training. I don't know how many people have to be at that one, but
We can cancel that one.
I'm just letting you know because I'm seeing a conflict in my schedule.
Okay. Gotcha.
Just, what was that date, Ernest?
February.
Feb 11, the meeting date.
Okay. So maybe we'll look to reschedule that one. All right, Lori, just let me know, have Gabe or you shoot me an email. And for now, we'll just plan January 14th. Staff will go ahead and send out this to everyone just to get it on the calendars. And then if we have to update it, we will, and go from there.
Sounds good, thank you.
Okay, no problem. All right. With that, okay, we'll close out new business. Reports, update on roadway maintenance. I just wanted to let you guys know what the latest on that is. I brought back what we originally had. This has not changed. I was going to meet with the townships about this. So I had Ernest and Steve, and the three of us were kind of working through some of that. I went to the townships and found out that for some of our smaller townships, their roads are to the point where they can't even mill because it's just built on dirt. So they're almost always gonna overlay. And given their budget, what we decided to do, at least initially, was bring in a review from county staff, essentially. So their MFTs get reviewed and approved by MCDOT around this time or in November. So if they come into us and they start their planning process and get everything reviewed by March, we would be able to give them an idea of which projects might be of concern for maintenance or improvements. The projects that aren't, sure, raise it 3 inches, 4 inches, whatever you need to help that longevity of the road to get that bang for your buck. So it sounds like because of that time frame and the amount of roadways that they're doing, there shouldn't really be a slowdown for them in their process as long as they come to us early enough. I was scheduled to meet with all of them in November at their monthly meeting. It snowed, they canceled, they had to plow. They haven't rescheduled for December, so I'm slated to meet with them in January to discuss that process with them. But what hopefully we're gonna change this maintenance to be is that they don't crease impervious area. This review is gonna be completed by staff, and then it eliminates any issues with potentially 2 inches, 3 inches, 4 inches. They can go ahead and do whatever they feel is needed for that road. So I just wanted to give everyone an update. I think that's where we wanted to go with it anyway. So if they're on board with that process, then it shouldn't be an issue. And I will know more once I'm able to meet with them. So there's no discussion on that. I will go ahead. Do we have any announcements? Nope. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Okay, moved by Bruce, seconded by Vince.